Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and well, let's talk about the Moondrop Joker. That's right, we've got Moondrop's latest headphone. This is their third ever headphone, their first closed back headphone, and it's also their cheapest headphone. It's costing just 80 bucks, which is actually kind of an interesting price point for them to hit. Now, what they're going for with the Joker here, according to their website, is sort of a studio professional monitoring sound, which for a closed back professional monitoring sound, look, there's a bunch of headphones like that. You've got like the Sony MDR 7506. I'm not a super big fan of that. So I don't know. It's a very interesting and I think appropriate place for Moondrop to be playing in. And so for the past, I don't know, about a week or so, I've been living with and listening to the Joker. And we're going to let you know what I think about this headphone. So let's start off by just talking about the physical form factor, the build quality on this thing, which is, if you recall my review of the Moondrop Void, which I think was late last year, this is using a lot of the same chassis build materials and stuff of the Void. And you might recall, I was not super impressed with the build quality on the Void. Now, here with the Joker, there are some things that are changed about it, and actually for the better, but I think maybe most importantly is the fact that this is like costs half the price of the Void. In fact, less. The Void was a $200 headphone, and the build quality issues that it had left a little bit to be desired at 200 bucks. Where this thing is priced at 80 bucks, I think it's more in line with expectations. I mean, you still have kind of a floppy build, I'll be honest. But you know, it is what it is. It's still a little bit clacky when you do sort of this jam. But the things that are actually a little bit nicer, well, for starters, the pads I actually think feel a little bit nicer. They've got this fabric material on the inside, where, as I recall, the Void was all just like this gray pleather on the outside, which felt a little bit on the cheap side. And you have also got that same fabric material carried up here in the headband. So that's a nice touch. I also think the pads are more angled than I recall the pads being on the Void. You can see kind of how thick they are in the back here, whereas if I flip it around to the front, you can see how narrow they are, which is angles them. And then the other thing that is a big difference is obviously it's a closed back headphone, but maybe more importantly, or more significantly, less significantly, okay, well, if we're being honest, but okay, where was I going with it? The other big difference here is that this cup, this outer panel right here, is actually metal. And in fact, according to what they describe it, this is a brass outer. They've kind of got an interesting, is it a marketing gimmick? Is it it's a real thing, but basically, the underneath this thing is just, according to them, is just like solid brass, or at least, you know, a thin layer of solid brass, which means that, and then that's underneath a layer of paint, which means that as this paint wears, you will start to see the brass come through, and the brass should be kind of colored like this, like it looks a little bit on the gold side, right? They're pitching it as like this thing will develop a patina over time, with extended use, and I guess that's actually kind of a neat thing. Not the sort of thing I would expect on like an $80 headphone. You know, you would expect heavy use, patina, to be on like a headphone or an IM or something like that, that carries with you for decades or something like that. And maybe this is or isn't that headphone, but it's kind of a neat little gimmick. They actually include, apparently in the retail packaging, like a sanding paper or something like that if you want to distress it yourself. I have not distressed mine, as you can see, but maybe with time it will become distressed. Apart from that, I guess I'll do a little bit of a fit test in a bit, but real quick, I will also mention this comes with the same cable that the Void comes with, which I'm actually a really big fan of. I love this cable. This is just like a standard 3.5 mil dual entry, right? So you can ostensibly put on any cable you want, or you can take this cable and put it on another headphone of your choice. I've actually done that with a few of them that I've got, but I just really like it. It's got really nice behavior on it. It's lightweight, it's cloth covered if you can't tell. It is maybe a little bit prone to microphonics, just like cable noise and stuff like that, but I don't know. I don't really have an issue with it, and just overall, I love this cable. And I guess on that note, I will give you a bit of a fit demonstration here of the Void on my head. So now one thing that's interesting is that because of those closed back compartments here, the Void is actually a little bit wider on the head than the Joker. How long have I been calling this thing the Void? Hopefully that was the first time, but there's a good chance it's not. The Joker is a little bit wider on my head than the Void was. But, you know, I don't know. I think aesthetically it is working out all right. I did have the same sort of fit issues that I had with the Void, where I didn't get a very good seal down here around the back of my ear. Now, the way I was able to solve for that was actually, let's see, we'll do a bit of a demonstration here, where the headband connects to the ear cup yoke. You can see there's a little bit of a pivot. The metal is actually pretty thin at this point, and it's pretty easy to just take this and tweak it inward just ever so slightly. And what that did is it just had the effect of giving me a little bit better seal, actually quite a bit better seal down here at the bottom of my ears. And I gotta say, with that tweak, and given how lightweight and just kind of, I don't know, simple and bare bones the build on this headphone is, I actually really like to wear it. I like to wear it a lot. Like, it feels kind of like slipping into a motorcycle helmet. If you've ever done that, like a nice, firm, tight motorcycle helmet, where it just feels like it's hugging my head. It feels nice and pretty stable. I don't know that I'd go out running with it, but I wouldn't go out running with most over-ear headphones. Seems like a bad idea. But yeah, generally pretty into the way that this thing fits on my head. You know, again, maybe it's sticking out a little bit far, but I don't know. I'm not super bothered by that. Are you? Yeah, I think because of that, I've actually been using it more than I probably would have otherwise, and that's going to lead us into talking about the sound here on the Joker. So, like I mentioned up front, they're aiming for a studio monitor sound. And to that end, what I can say that they've succeeded at is this is not a bassy headphone. So if you're looking for a bass-oriented, thumpy headphone, that's not really what the Joker is all about. It is going much more for a mid-rangey, top-endy sort of sound, but if I'm perfectly honest, I think the stock tuning on this headphone is not only not very good, I think it's actually kind of bad, if I'm perfectly honest. It's just like, it's thin, it's shrill, it's sharp, it's just kind of uncomfortable, it's a little sibilant, and these are all like the kind of words you don't want to hear about a headphone. In fact, let me pull up Squiglink real quick, which I've got loaded. This is a frequency response of the Moondrop Joker that I made, and now normally I'm looking at frequency responses of IEMs that I record, so this is made on a headphone measurement rig, so a little bit different than what you're typically used to seeing, but I think a good comparison. In fact, let me pull up this just so we're looking at something that people are more familiar with, right? This dotted line now is how Sennheiser HD 600 measures on my rig. And the big things that stand out for me, which I think are a problem for me, not just looking at a graph. Well, the graph is one thing. Like, use the graph as a diagnostic tool much more than as sort of ground truth. But I think in this case, it's actually a pretty good diagnostic tool. The two problems for me, actually maybe three problems for me. Let's start with the smaller problems, okay? Up here in the treble region, it is a little bit bright here, around, what is that, 6 to 8K or something like that. You know, when I'm listening to it, I'm not saying, oh, wow, that's bright at 6 to 8K, but you measure it, you see that there's a little bit of an excess there, and if you use EQ to pull that down, sure enough, it does clear up some of that. Again, I mentioned it was a little bit on the sibilant side. Pulling that down clears it up a little bit. I think also up here you see in the upper mid-range, I think that's also contributing to that kind of thin and nasally sound. The vocals just sound really quite hollow, like they're coming out of like laptop speakers or something like that. And again, you know, you use the graph as a diagnostic tool, take EQ, pull that down, and you're like, okay, yeah, it actually is making things better. I think honestly, this is the biggest problem for me though, when it comes to the frequency response, is just this very significant dip in the lower mid-range, which comes across as just making the headphone sound quite thin. Okay. So yeah, I am frankly not very impressed with the stock tuning on this headphone, but I mentioned that I have nevertheless been listening to the Joker quite a bit, and well, the way that I cope is with EQ. So if we go back over here to Squiglink, I'll show you exactly what I've done with EQ. And this is why I've titled this video, by the way, Needs Work, because I think this headphone out of the box, I don't love it. But with EQ, I actually started to like it quite a bit. So here's what we're getting with my EQ, right? I am filling in this lower mid-range dip so that it's not scooped out, not hollow. I am also, extending the bass because you might as well if you're going to be using EQ. This sort of change down here is not necessarily, I'm a big fan of the Sennheiser HD600. You see that its bass is quite low down here. I'm fine with that generally, but if you're going to be using EQ, you might as well fill in the sub bass, and that's what I've done. And so that combination, in fact, let me pull that graph up, the original graph up for comparison. So there, we're looking at, in blue, the original void measurement. Let me change that color just so we are a little bit more differentiated. There we go. All right, so in blue, we are looking at the original Moondrop. I keep calling it the void, Joker measurement. And then now here in yellow, we've got my EQ'd measurement. And you can see this difference. This difference down here in the low end is just adding a lot of warmth that I think this headphone frankly needs. And if you know my preferences, look, I am not a big bass head kind of guy. I generally like a neutral tuned monitor sound. It's just that the Joker stock it's not really that. It is thin and just overly thin and bright and shrill. I am also, of course, dropping the upper mid-range down here, which makes the vocals, I think, sound more richer and less shrill. And then also lowering the mid-treble here just to make some improvements there. And I apologize if you hear some weird sounds going on in my background. Like I mentioned, I'm not in my studio. That is a sound that is new to me. And I hope it's not as obnoxious in this video as it is here in person. If it is, I'm going to have to re-record it. Anyway, so those are the changes that I made with EQ. And with these changes, I actually think that the Joker becomes a pretty stinking good headphone. Look, closed back headphones, I generally don't love. But this one with EQ, with bending the headband so that it actually fits around my head quite well, with those changes, I start to like this headphone a lot. Now, I got to rate a headphone without EQ. I mean, I'm fine reviewing the headphone with the bending of the headband as a requirement. It is what it is. But the EQ, you may or may not be interested in using EQ. Me personally, I don't really like to use EQ. So I do it out of necessity to find out what is the possibility of this headphone, and the technical performance becomes pretty decent with the EQ. But I don't really want to listen to it without EQ. So honestly, out of 5 stars, I'm going to give it just 2 stars. I think if you're open to using EQ, you can very easily make this a 4-star headphone. But that is what it is. That is the Moondrop Joker. If you're interested in checking it out, I've got it linked in the description down below. Shout out to Shenzhen Audio, by the way, for sending this in for review. I've got them linked down below as well. And while you're down there, if you found this video helpful, please do hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, and I will catch you on the next super review. Cheers.